There you go, you're live.
Hi, I'm Congressman Adam Schiff, and welcome to Facebook Live. It's a pleasure to join you today and introduce my special guest, Alex Alfaro. Alex is an enormously talented writer and producer and poet. I had the opportunity to see one of his works, Wet, A Documented Journey, which was just phenomenal. And he has some exciting developments to share with us about the play. But I'm so delighted to have this conversation and talk about the DREAM Act and DACA, but very particularly glad to have Alex here. I'm a tremendous fan of his. But Alex, if you could tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so like the Congressman said, my name is Alex Alfaro. I'm an actor, writer, poet. I'm also a documented American. I have a show called Wet, A Documented Journey that I have been doing since August of last year, amidst all of the things that have been happening with this administration and the attempts to pass the DREAM Act and some kind of resolution for DACA.
And part of what made this play so powerful is it's Alex's story, and he stars in it, and it very much humanizes the whole issue. I wish everyone in the country could see this play. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about where we stand in terms of the DREAM Act and what just took place with the fight over the government shutdown. As many of you may know, back in September, the President, through the Attorney General, announced that they were effectively rescinding DACA, and that effective in March, the Dreamers would lose the protections under this program. Meaning that as soon as March, we could have many of the hundreds of thousands of Dreamers in this country, people who grew up here, know no other country but this one as their home. They could face deportation, they could face the loss of their jobs because the work permits that they were able to obtain through the DACA process would no longer be valid. So obviously some extreme consequences. The President did this, set this clock ticking without proposing any fix, which I think was deeply irresponsible, but it's put us into this crisis. Over the last couple weeks, we sought to compel a solution. We sought to compel having Congress bring up the DREAM Act to put in statute this program and protect these young people. We were not able to do that. I voted against the continuing resolution because frankly, the most that the majority was willing to do to gain our support was to promise that in the Senate they would take up something. We got no promise in the House at all from the Speaker. And more than that, we're just continuing the same kick the can down the road approach, not only on the DREAM Act, where it has the most dire consequences, but in terms of the way we fund our government. So this goes back to the failure of the majority to pass an annual budget bill, and we've been operating on what are called continuing resolutions that fund the government for a few months or for a few weeks. This latest kick the can down the road gave us 3 more weeks to come to some kind of resolution, but we keep getting closer and closer to that March date when the Dreamers are fully exposed. So I voted against it, thought it was a bad deal, and we have made no progress on that and are still in that very precarious position the President put us in. So that's a little bit about where we are in the legislative process. Your calls and emails and activism has been incredibly important. I hope you keep it up. It's what gives us the chance to be successful on this. My colleagues in the GOP say they care about the Dreamers, but don't seem willing to do anything but use them as leverage to get a wall. I think it's shameful to use the future of these young people in such a cynical way. But Alex, if you would share with our viewers your own experience, what it means to be a Dreamer,
Sure.
What it's been like for you before the DACA program, what it's been like since, and what this limbo is like.
Yeah, well, I'm an American in every sense of the word except on paper. I've been in the country since I was 3 months old, you know, and my mother brought me here, risking her life, risking my life. I actually died at one point in time on the way over here. And I grew up just like any other American, you know, eating American food, watching cartoons, speaking the English language at home. I consider it my primary operative language. I follow popular culture. I listen to hip hop music. I watch all of the Marvel movies. So there's everything about my life is no different than any other upbringing of an inner city kid in Los Angeles. But it was a difficult thing for me to acknowledge and come to grips with when I was a teenager, because when you're undocumented in this country, you don't realize that there's a lot of things that you can't do until you try to do them. And when you're shielded from the realities of what the laws are, especially when you're quote unquote not supposed to be here, when you're a child, it's okay because it doesn't affect you immediately. And it doesn't affect you directly. It's when you start growing up. When I was 16 years old and I couldn't do a clean and green job because I didn't have a social security number. When I was 17, I couldn't take behind the wheel so that I could get a driver's permit because I didn't have a social security number. When I was 18 years old is when everything kind of changed, because I realized that I wasn't able to get a job. Even with a high school diploma, no one was going to hire me. I wasn't going to be able to get in-state tuition to go to college because I didn't have documentation that proved that I was allowed to be in the country, which was something that was very shocking for me, because everyone in my family, my brothers, my sister, my cousins, my nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, mother, everyone is an American citizen either by birth or by naturalization, except for me. I'm the one person that slipped through the cracks. And it wasn't by any fault of my own. It wasn't any fault of my parents, you know. It simply happened that there wasn't any legislation, or there hasn't been any legislation that has passed that has given an individual like myself an opportunity to fully be integrated into the society that I've been raised in and have grown up in. Me being an artist, me being a social worker in this country is a byproduct of the beauty and the greatness of what this country has to offer, which is my home. I know no other home. You know, if I were to, God forbid, get deported to Guatemala, which is where my family is from, I would have no way of knowing how to live, how to get by, how to get through, because even though I speak Spanish that was taught to me in the United States. I don't speak the language the way that it's spoken in Guatemala. I don't understand the laws there. I don't understand how things work. So being a DACA-mented American, which is what I consider myself, I don't necessarily consider myself a dreamer, because the DREAM Act is failed legislation. Up until this point, it has failed us. It has failed the community. It has failed these kids. Because yes, I was a kid when the DREAM Act was introduced. I was 17 years old. But I'm in my 30s now, and I have a teenager who is afraid. And my 16-year-old daughter shouldn't have to be afraid that her father may not come home, that her father may not be around to watch her graduate from college and go to the university. She has the right to have her father by her side when she goes to her first day of school, when she gets married, when she has her child, etc. You know.
So Alex, what was it like when President Obama announced DACA? How did you feel when that happened, and how did you feel when you saw our now Attorney General basically take the opposite action?
Well, it happened exactly 5 years apart for me. When President Obama announced the DACA program, it was a pinhole of light in a very, very steep and dark tunnel that was my life. You know, at the time, having a college education and having this particular set of skills and not being able to use them because I wasn't allowed to work. I was homeless. I was couch surfing. I was staying with a friend, and I would do odd jobs to make ends meet. Anything that I could do to make a little money so I could put a little food in my stomach and keep some clothes on my back, like that. It was survival mode. I spent 30 plus years in survival mode. Even though I went to school, I got educated, I didn't get in trouble. You know, because that was something that's always been emphasized. Don't get in trouble. Don't do anything wrong, because you can end up getting deported for the slightest thing. So when DACA was announced, it was the first time that I actually had hope that I was going to have an opportunity to be part of my community, things that people take for granted, like being able to open up a bank account or have a driver's license or be able to get an apartment or have credit. Like, credit was huge for me. I was like, oh my God, I can have credit. I can build my credit score like every other American. These were things that I hold dear to. You know, I have a driver's license now, and I protect it because I cherish it so much, because I know what it's like not to have one. And so when the Attorney General announced the rescindment of DACA back on September 5th, it was exactly 5 years from the date that I first applied for DACA, which was September 5th, 2012. So it was something very demoralizing, very dehumanizing. I was devastated. I'm still devastated, and I feel like I've been living in this alternative reality that somehow doesn't make sense to me, because it's like giving me the opportunity to feel, to experience, to live what it's like to fully be an American, which is what I've always considered myself. I don't see myself as anything other. So even if I were to get deported and I end up in Europe or in India or in China or in anywhere in the world, I'm still going to be an American. And the funny thing is that I'm pretty sure that in another country they would treat me as such.
We're going to go to your questions in just a minute, but I had one other thing I wanted to ask you. When you made the decision to participate in DACA, did you have any trepidation that, you know, sort of coming out of the shadows and registering, you were giving your information to the government with a certain trust and expectation that they would honor this? Was that a concern when you did it, and how does it feel now to know that that information that you provided may in a way be used against you?
Yeah, of course, it was a risk, but you know, I love this country so much. You know, it's my home, that I was willing to take that risk because it was something. The risk the benefit outweighed the risk more than anything in that moment, and I don't regret it, because again, the moment that I'll never forget the date, you know, May 1st, 2013, when my work permit came in the mail. I drove from Los Angeles, where I was couch surfing with a friend, all the way down to San Diego, where my mother lived, just to go pick up my work permit. And I cried. I remember crying the whole way back, and I couldn't believe it. I had this little piece of plastic that had my name and had an alien registration number, and that was my foot in the door, you know, and so it changed my life, and I always knew that the risk of my information being used against me was always going to be there. I've never been ignorant of that. I just didn't think that it was going to be possible, that it was going to happen, and that it can happen if something doesn't get passed by March 5th of this year.
So let's go to your questions and comments. Pam writes, what can we do to help? And I think really probably the most important thing for people to do is to speak out, to communicate with their representatives, to communicate publicly, express support for the DREAM Act and for solving this problem, but also to make it clear that this issue, which, you know, has the overwhelming sympathy and support of the American people. I think 90% of the American people now support the DREAM Act, is being used to leverage something that is very unpopular, and that is Trump's wall. So the president knows his wall is unpopular and wishes to use the future of these young people as a lever to bludgeon people to get his wall. Of course, the president said that Mexico was going to pay for this wall, which is absurd. But if the president is so determined to keep his campaign commitment, then he needs to get Mexico or someone else to pay for the wall, which all of us know is not going to happen. But communicate with Washington, communicate in your own community, let people know that Congress needs to solve this. The administration needs to get out of the way. We need to have a vote on the DREAM Act, and they should stop using the future of these young people as leverage for this very unpopular wall. So let me ask you, if I could, one other thing. There are a lot of misconceptions about who the Dreamers are.
Yeah.
The president and my GOP colleagues have been derisively referring to this during the debate as well, these are a bunch of illegals that the Democrats want to place above the needs of our military. What would you like people to know about those affected by this?
I think it's a shameful tactic that they're trying to pit our great military against the undocumented community. I actually come from a military family. My stepfather served in the Navy for 20 years. My brother-in-law is a chief in the Navy. You know, and I understand the sacrifices that have to be made by these great men of service that have to go overseas and risk their lives for our freedoms and for our protections. And so it saddens me because I'm losing my sister in September because her family has to get shipped to a different country because it's part of my brother-in-law's duty as an active sailor. So to say that we can't have one thing, that we can only have one thing or the other, I think is absurd. I think that there is a way to reach a compromise where you can satisfy the requirements of, you know, securing the borders and also granting status to people like myself and other members of the community. I hope that the people that are watching and the people that have the power to do something about it can understand that we are your neighbors, we are your friends, we are your colleagues, we are the people that you see every single day, and we're human beings. And the only difference between us and you or anybody is oftentimes a piece of paper that tells us whether or not we can be here.
Alex, I really appreciate your joining me today.
It's been my pleasure.
It's moving as always to hear your story.
Thank you.
Before we part, we have a tradition when we do Facebook Live of doing a lightning round of questions on much less serious topics.
All right.
Although, given that you are an actor and a producer, director, you might find this even more serious. But first lightning round is, what's the last movie you saw at the theaters?
What was the last movie that I saw at the theater? I think it was Lady Bird.
Lady Bird.
Yeah.
That was a great movie.
It's a great flick, yeah. Shout out to my friend Carla Valentine, who was in that. She was great. Yeah.
Was she, which role did she play?
She played the school counselor in the film. Yeah, she had a nice role. So
Great
awesome.
movie.
Yeah.
I think the last one I saw was Shape of Water, which was also excellent. I think that's my pick for Best Picture.
Okay.
I won't put you on the spot
Yeah.
though. Favorite restaurant?
Favorite restaurant is a childhood restaurant, a Thai restaurant called Ocha. It's it was originally on James Woods and Vermont. It's been there forever. It's funny because only Latinos frequent it, but it's a Thai restaurant.
I'm gonna try that. I have not. Have you tried Jitlada? Another great Thai restaurant, which I'm mangling the name.
I would love to though, because
we'll swap info.
Cool, let's do it.
Let's see. Favorite band.
Favorite band depends. Are we talking classic rock? Are we talking contemporary? Are we talking hip hop?
Either one.
If we're talking hip hop, I have to say Bone Thugs and Harmony. If we're talking classic rock, I'd have to go with the Beatles. If we're talking contemporary rock, I'd have to say the Black Keys.
I will go with Kings of Leon for contemporary rock.
Okay.
Steely Dan for classic.
Ooh, good one.
And in terms of hip hop, I think I'm out of my element.
Fair enough.
Dog or cat?
Dog.
Dog.
I'm allergic to cats.
Well,
yeah,
I'm a total dog person. Favorite superhero?
For me, it has to be Spidey. It's always been Spider-Man.
Really?
Yeah, ever since I was a kid. I could identify with Peter Parker, I lost my father when I was 15, and Peter lost his father figure when he was about 15 years old too, and he was given a great responsibility, and through trial and error and through years, he became the superhero that he is.
Very cool. Mine's Batman. Okay. Very dark superhero.
Yeah.
Never had any interest really in Superman because he seemed invulnerable. He never really seemed in jeopardy.
It's like a god.
He was the least interesting of the superheroes, except the old black and white Superman that I watched as a kid, which was awesome.
Yeah.
Of course, the old Batman that I watched as a kid was equally awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe even more awesome.
Well, Adam West, That was the Batman I grew up watching on TV.
Yeah,
so,
me too.
yeah.
Alex, thank you.
Thank you.
Great to be with you.
Great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Signing off.